Ah, the French champagne.
Champagne!
The schlocky movie from this week may be the schlockiest film we've ever seen on this podcast.
I'm Mr. Pink.
Sis Blue.
So Miranda hasn't seen Reservoir Dogs.
Those men's children are all identical clones of Adolf Hitler.
Once they were men, now they are land crabs.
Amanda Bynes is a national treasure.
There's like a bunch of other shit that happens in Driven.
Is there?
Secret Nazis.
Yeah.
Secret Nazis.
Hey, Daddy lost his eagle.
I hope
So-
no one from my family listens to this podcast.
The Citizen Kane of the week is...
Hey, and welcome to the first of our Podlet series. This is something new that we're doing just to release some shorter content, some smaller content, something briefer, some snack size content. So essentially how these are going to work is that we just have smaller topics, things that have come up a lot on the podcast, definitely to start us off, just like how we can dive into them. And so the first one I want to give to us as to discuss seems like it would be the obvious one to discuss, which is what makes a classic a classic.
Oh.
Ooh.
This was a real point of contention on the Coyote Ugly episode, if I remember correctly.
Right, yeah.
It was. Well, didn't we go as far as like look up the definition of a classic?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that? I think it has to be like 20-something years.
Right.
Or
according
something.
to whatever, like,
Yeah.
According to the
website this
internet,
was.
which
According
is-
to who,
which is
right?
gospel.
And I think to me, the first thing I'm going to say is that the gospel of the internet.
Yeah.
Is that like what makes something a classic isn't like defined. Like the tricky thing about it is that you can't it can't be ordained by some group. There is no like college of film academia that's like we have granted this one status in the Hall of Classics. Like that isn't a thing. Right?
No,
Right.
I mean, there is the Criterion Collection, which is like a certain group of film nerds who have decided that certain things are classics and like the American Library of Congress, you know, they put films in there to say that this is like contributed toward American culture in some way.
Yeah. And those are factors. Like
Yeah.
those are factors. Like critical acclaim are a factor in being a classic. Like historic relevance and just like being memorable and still remaining relevant.
I think that's, I mean, I kind of feel like how much the film kind of infiltrates the zeitgeist is what makes it a classic. How,
I think it's a big part of it.
yeah. Like, because I think that at a time you could define a classic as specifically regarding the quality of the film. But I think that like cinema has changed and public taste has changed so much that now it really is just kind of how much it kind of like stays in the realm of conversation. You know what I mean? Like how much people remember it and how much people talk about it is
Yeah.
kind of like the deciding factor for me. Because we have movies like, I don't know, The Fast and the Furious, which I guess at this point now technically under like the like actual criteria would be a classic because it's like 20 years old or whatever. But
Yeah,
it's by
the
no
first
means
film for sure.
But it's by no means like a good movie.
No.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, and that's the thing. Classic doesn't necessarily mean good, right?
But like it kind of like when you say the word classic, it has a certain connotation, right? It has a certain implication that it is a good quality movie.
Or it somehow left its mark.
Yeah, it has contributed towards, as you said, the zeitgeist, like a thought that is prevalent.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
never seen really any of the Fast and Furious movies except for Hobbs and Shaw.
You've never seen any of the Fast and Furious
No,
movies?
me neither.
No, never.
Oh,
Oh,
no, I
dude.
saw Tokyo Drift.
Yo, it's the one you don't watch.
Yeah.
do yourself a favor, both of you, and watch like all nine.
I
of
want to
them,
wait.
10 of
I
them.
want to know how they
Nine of
finish it.
Yeah,
so
we're
I'm
doing
wait.
our Land Before Time versus
Versus,
the
yeah.
Fast
Right.
series, right?
Yeah, we'll
Right,
do
right.
some. We'll
Yeah.
do some mega marathon of it.
It is such a wild journey to watch how much those fucking films change
Yeah.
from like the gritty world of underground street
Yeah.
racing to like we're superheroes going to space in rocket cars.
Yeah.
Did you see the thirsty Instagramming Vin Diesel's been doing at The Rock?
No, is he just like begging him to be in the movie now?
Yeah, I think whatever one they're making now, before it went into production, he like it publicly Instagrammed like, "My kids call you daddy."
Oh yeah, I
And
did
they-
see that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just like really
It's
like,
time
come
to come
back,
home."
bro.
Yeah.
Just ignored.
And The Rock is like, "You're a bitch."
Fuck off.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, I mean, their spat was like really public, right? Like
Right,
they
yeah.
really
A
didn't
classic
get along.
spat.
A classic spat.
Well, how old is the spat?
Yeah.
Well, but that's the thing, though. You're right about something like Fast and the Furious. I didn't expect that to be the movie that became a movie of topic in this discussion. But like even that it left its mark, right? And it influenced how movies were being made, and it also evolved. Like it's one of those things where like in terms of making its mark, it's like I would argue like if it's older than like, to be generous, if it's older than 30, definitely 40 years, and you like are aware that it's a movie, like you've heard of it, it's a classic. At this point, like if you've heard of it, like at this point, if it's made before 1980 and you've heard of that movie, I would argue it's probably a classic.
I don't know, man. There's a movie that I've never seen called like Lawnmower Man. It was like an 80s horror movie.
Yeah.
And I haven't seen it and don't know much about it because it's not like arguably a good movie, but I know of it. I don't think that makes it a classic just because I know the title. I know it exists.
Well, here's another thing though, and horror is
Are you looking up Lawnmower Man?
I was, but
Okay.
I'm not anymore.
horror is a funny genre within this conversation because we've talked a lot about this, I think, on the pod, that like horror also exists in this world of schlock. Like horror, the horror genre is kind of king schlock in many ways.
Sure.
So a lot of those movies become classics because they wear the crown of king schlock so well.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally. Yeah.
So Lawnmower Man, for example, sounds like a movie that you may have heard of because people in that community were like, yo, this movie is so out there, it gets to be... So it's a kind of a genre that exists a bit in its own world in terms of what makes things classic.
I understand what you're saying, but I think my point remains the same, that maybe horror is not the best example, but there are certainly movies that I know of, or that I know that exist from the past, 50 years that... What's up?
Lawnmower Man, 1992, 5.4 out of 10. Pierce Brosnan is an eccentric doctor who puts a mentally disabled landscaper on a regimen of experimental pills and computer-simulated training sequences in the hopes of augmenting the man's intelligence.
I mean, that actually sounds pretty dope.
Yeah, that sounds like it's scooped up on the parabola to be
Oh my
so
God.
bad it's good again.
Yeah.
Especially when you said Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah.
That wasn't the name I didn't know I needed to hear in that movie.
That's like James Bond era Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I guess
Yeah.
it was, eh?
Hilarious.
Yeah, okay, well, why don't we... What was the point of contention with Coyote Ugly? Because I think I was on the side of it being a classic at that point,
Well,
right?
because and that had to do with it being like when it came out. Again, it was this idea of a certain number of years, which I don't fully believe in, but it does have an influence.
Yeah.
But
Wasn't that the point you were just making, though? That if it's X number of years old and you know it exists, it is technically a classic?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying though. But like, it's not just that though. That's the thing about this conversation that I think is funny. It's not just about time. Like there are lots of movies that are older movies, but they just kind of died out, right?
Right.
Except for some people who there are certain videophiles who like love they're
Yeah.
like Criterion people and they love going through old movies and like this is a classic. There's all these great things in it, and like the horror people are really dedicated and they go through like the whole catalog. And
I think for the purpose of our podcast, at least, the
Yeah.
term classic has morphed into a film that is commonly known and is probably a little older, although with Dune, like we put that right into the classic category because of the weight it had with Denis Villeneuve and the weight it has with science fiction fans in just being a classic novel and needing something like that. So it's really, for us, it is just, we are taking a classic, something that people love, a large group of people for some reason, and we're throwing it up against something else to test the reasons why people love that thing.
yes, it kind of has to do with that.
Yeah.
I mean, also the Dune episode felt like a funny episode where like we were just making a bit of a laugh how like the classic movie was the old Dune, but it was the schlock one.
It was garbage.
And then the new one was already an instant classic, and it was great. Like it was kind of this funny send up of our own thing.
But I think that like the Dune thing is a good example because there is a certain quality to films that you can tell will be classic movies, right? Like I think Dune had just come out, so you couldn't even say at that point that it was an instant classic, but there is a certain quality to a movie. I'm not saying quality to like the filmmaking, but there's a certain kind of quality to a movie itself that you can kind of just tell.
Yeah.
At some point, this will be a classic,
And it's it does not have to do with like awards. Like there are lots of Oscar movies that we have all forgotten about, and Oscar performances or whatever like that clearly isn't it. It clearly has something to do with again, we threw out that lovely word zeitgeist earlier, and like just again that people were like crazy for it.
Yeah, okay. So then I guess for me, this all comes back to, do we think Coyote Ugly is a classic?
No.
Well, and here's the thing too, is that it is partly subjective. Like we certainly have been subjective in ours. Like why have a movie like Die Hard be a classic? It's beloved by many people. It's like
Die Hard is 100% a classic.
Die Hard's a classic.
Die Hard, I don't think there's a way to refute that.
Two guys.
Also, I think it's pretty widely known as a classic.
But
Yeah.
I'm just saying that I'm trying to actually defend Coyote Ugly here, which I think is would be more widely enjoyed. Like I think is the thing that you brought it up with Marisa, and she was like, "That's 100% a classic." Wasn't that partly her opinion as well?
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, it might have been she was trying to say that it was a classic.
Yeah.
And I might have been trying to say that it wasn't a classic.
I think so.
Yeah,
but I think you came around to the other side.
Well,
You know,
because
there's an element of bias.
I think that Die Hard, I mean, I would argue that Coyote Ugly probably wouldn't be as enjoyed by as many people as Die Hard, but it does kind of tick a lot of the boxes that we've been talking about. It is now 20 years old.
Die Hard?
No,
30.
No,
Coyote
Ugly.
Ugly.
Yeah.
23 years old.
23 years. Was it the late 90s?
It was like 99, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So old, still referenced today. Like people still talk about. I mean, I don't know, like not reference in pop culture, but like anybody who is around our age group or maybe even a little younger than us knows what it is, and not even like knows what it is in terms of knows the movie title, but like understands how it relates to like bar culture.
yeah, like the bar dancing movie.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I just think like it's one of those things that the bias exists for different ways in different people. So I think like we're all dudes, so I think we've had more action movies, for example, on this podcast. And I think that's just relative to the movies that we liked watching when we were younger.
We did The Notebook.
Yeah, I know. We gave him one.
Yeah.
And Coyote Ugly, apparently. If I had known, I probably would have been like, no. No, but like
If you had known what the movie was.
no, I've been like, no, we're not doing it. But you know, so that just feels like a big part of it, right? So the classic that term is still subjective to people. There are some movies
Sure.
that I think transcend that. There are movies that are just so in the zeitgeist that like you can't dispute that The Shining is a classic, for example. Like that's a movie that I've never even seen The Shining, and I know tons about that movie.
Ooh.
There are images I know of it. Like it's just, and I feel like that's the case for a lot of people. And you're aware of Here's Johnny.
Yeah.
You know, like there's this. They've broken through in such a way.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good point as well, because I think a big contributing factor can be just how original or unique the concept is.
Yep.
Right? Like if it's a wholly different thing, or at least it was at the time, I think that kind of can also help cement its position as a classic film.
Yeah.
That doesn't always work. I mean, we have movies. Was Crank our schlock on the last one?
It was.
Yes.
Yeah. I was
Right.
thinking of Crank when you were
and
saying
like,
this.
yeah, and like Crank is like, I don't know. I don't see a movie like Crank is interesting because we're still talking about it today. It's what, 15 years old, 20 years old?
Yeah, something like that.
I don't think a lot of people know what it is. It's not like, it's arguably a bad movie,
Yeah.
but it's like its own thing. And therefore it is kind of a standalone, immediately recognizable name. Does that make it a classic?
To some people, yeah.
To some people, like that's the.
I'd say it's a classic, especially because it comes in that sweet Jason Statham era of the mid 2000s. You
Yeah.
know, classic Jason Statham.
Yeah.
Transporter.
And so here's a question then. So, like, what about a movie like Avatar? Right. It was. It made the most money. It was one of the most viewed movies. But where does that movie because box office doesn't really matter either. But we've said but also making an impact on the greater culture matters.
It will be.
It will be, but it's
yeah.
funny because
It's funny,
as
right?
soon as you said Avatar, my immediate gut reaction was like, no, that isn't one.
It will. I mean, it broke it it did new things.
It
And
did.
It was like a marvel of
Yeah.
cinema.
Yeah,
It was like here's
it
where
broke
cinema's
ground.
going.
It is old. Everyone knows exactly what it is.
There's
but
nothing in it that you can reference.
there's
there's-
nothing that you can reference.
It made no impact.
Hey, they have tail sex.
Oh,
Unobtainium.
that's true. That's true.
Unobtainium.
That's true.
What's the planet? Pandora?
Pandora.
The planet's called Pandora and bad things happen on it. Fucking James Cameron. God.
I can't wait for 17 more of those movies.
Yeah.
But I think that like it's a good point. There's not a lot you can reference in it. And also like it's not a movie that you can rewatch.
No.
Which I'm realizing now might also play a role.
I
like,
saw it twice.
Yeah.
You saw it twice in theaters?
I would
Right.
probably never watch it again.
Yeah.
And
Because
I
it was
think-
only an in-theaters experience.
But I think that's what's contributing to my like, that's not really one because it's not an old movie that I would watch today and enjoy on like a regular TV. It's devoid of story.
Movies didn't used to be watched anywhere but the theaters.
Sure, but we're talking about like the classic quality, like what
Yeah.
gives a movie today a classic quality.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like we haven't really touched on. We've touched on all like the external kind of factors of a movie, but not really the importance of story and how that plays a role.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask, so what makes The Grapes of Wrath a classic? And I would argue it's because the story is so wonderfully executed by a cast of really brilliant actors, and like it's withstood the test of time because of that.
100%.
Yeah.
Now, I can't exactly remember what the subject matter of that movie was, but was it tackling something that was like socially relevant at the time that wasn't really being addressed?
Well, sure, yeah. It was, it's the family going across country to try and find work after their farm has dried to nothingness and they're being evicted from it. If you remember that.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, it is tackling the after effects of the Great Depression only like a decade after the Depression had happened. So there's certainly a lot of like people alive at that time who had experienced exactly what the family in the film was going through.
Well, that's what I'm talking about because they did something that was like fresh in people's minds and was kind of one of the first to like tackle that issue.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine that like from the jump, it was being considered as like this will be a classic movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like I think
maybe.
that if like a movie 15 years later tackling the Great Depression wouldn't have had the same impact and therefore wouldn't be remembered,
Right.
even if it matched The Grapes of Wrath in performance and
Mm-hmm.
execution of filmmaking, et cetera, et cetera.
And I guess Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is a more modern film that is tackling the same kind of themes, but it has an added layer of the songs and the like Coen Brothers kind of like nihilistic lens of life over top of it. So it's bringing those aspects to life anew through like a modern lens, I guess. So in order to do the old things again, you have to make it your own, make it new. That's just good filmmaking, Sean. Way to go.
Well, let's maybe end it there. That sounds like a perfectly
Classic is good film,
there. We did it. I knew we could settle it, and finally,
but also not a good film.
but also subjective.
So we solved nothing.
Were we going to solve anything?
I think the goal of this podcast, of these podlets,
Yeah.
is to like solve major issues and quandaries within the
Definitive.
world of film.
Yeah,
Be
we
definitive.
were gonna finally tackle the subjective issues of art.
Yeah.
and finally break them down and make it objective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah. No, that's the whole thing is that you can't do that.
Ooh, that should be our tagline, though. That should be like the whole like angle of this show. Is we aim, we aim to remove the
We
subjectivity
just
from
like
art.
create like an Excel spreadsheet of qualities,
Yeah.
and like you have to reach a certain score, and if you don't hit a certain score, you aren't in it. It's just like we make an IQ test essentially for movies.
Right.
I kind of love this idea,
All right.
actually.
Let's
That
become brutalists.
Yeah, you do all that. You make that test, and then we'll.
Well, I'm
do
not
it.
going to make a spreadsheet, but I like the idea of it being like we're trying to answer.
Okay, here's an idea. What if we did that, but at the same time we compared it against a schlocky movie, right? And then we like did
Ooh.
a scoring.
I see what you did there, you bitch.
Are you from Forever Dogshit Productions?
I sure am.
That bothered me for like a week after you showed me that fucking page, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder how they're doing. Hopefully
Apparently it
badly.
sucks.
All right, dude. I like scrubbed through one episode and it was like I actually couldn't listen to it.
I listened to one. They're like, they're smart people. They know what they're talking about. I was bored to tears, but like,
This is our rival podcast,
yeah,
by the way.
don't listen to them or do. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, what position do we want to take on that? Do we want to?
I don't really care.
We
is
should
the-
promote them and say, hey, there's enough space for all of us. For
I
both of
reached
us
out
to
on
do.
Twitter. They made a
you?
joke back, and I was like, okay, we're done.
Yeah.
What was the joke? What did you say?
Oh, I was like, hey, a nice podcast premise you got there. Maybe we should fight a duel over it, kind of thing. And they were like, Daddy, don't you see that we are your offspring? I was like, that's weird. I'm ending it there.
That is weird.
It's weird. It's just proof that they're not funny. Don't listen to them. Okay.
Yeah.
And just admitting that they stole our idea. Anyways, continue.
well.
Thanks. Stay tuned for more of these podlets.
Give us your thoughts on whether movies are a classic or not. What are your classic movies? Put them on our Twitter.
Yeah, tweet your classic movies
Right now.
Argue with us. Let's start a
fight.
Start a dialogue.
Yeah, okay, dialogue.
Oh, sorry, it's Twitter. Let's start a fight.
Let's start a fight, guys. Yeah.
Hey, that movie that you think is your favorite movie, and it's because it's a classic, that movie fucking sucks.
Yeah.
Debate
Here's
us
my
on Twitter.
promise to you. If you add us on Twitter and say, this is my classic film of classic films, I will shit on your film. I will find a way to make your classic film seem like shit. So that's my promise to
Yeah,
you.
in like 5-paragraph essay format.
Yeah.
What if it's Star Wars?
Oh, there's a lot of shit in Star Wars.
But you love Star Wars.
I do love Star Wars. I will shit on it
Okay.
for the internet.
All right, that's it. Ending it there. See ya on the next one. Blah blah.
That one's staying in.
Yeah, that one.